Penguin Random House Audio presents The Last Girl, My Story of Captivity and My Fight Against the Islamic State, by Nadia Murad, with a foreword by Amal Clooney. Read for you by Ilyana Kadushin. This book is written for every Yazidi. Foreword. Nadia Murad is not just my client. She is my friend. When we were introduced in London, she asked if I would act as her lawyer. She explained that she would not be able to provide funds, that the case would likely be long and unsuccessful. But before you decide, she had said, hear my story. In 2014, ISIS attacked Nadia's village in Iraq, and her life as a 21-year-old student was shattered. She was forced to watch her mother and brothers be marched off to their deaths, and Nadia herself was traded from one ISIS fighter to another. She was forced to pray, forced to dress up, and put makeup on in preparation for rape, and one night was brutally abused by a group of men until she was unconscious. She showed me her scars from cigarette burns and beatings, and she told me that throughout her ordeal, ISIS militants would call her a dirty unbeliever and brag about conquering Yazidi women and wiping their religion from the earth. Nadia was one of thousands of Yazidis taken by ISIS to be sold in markets and on Facebook, sometimes for as little as $20. Nadia's mother was one of 80 older women who were executed and buried in an unmarked grave. 6 of her brothers were among the hundreds of men who were murdered in a single day. What Nadia was telling me about is genocide. And genocide doesn't happen by accident. You have to plan it. Before the genocide began, the ISIS Research and Fatwa Department studied the Yazidis and concluded that, as a Kurdish-speaking group that did not have a holy book, Yazidis were non-believers whose enslavement was a firmly established aspect of the Sharia. This is why, according to ISIS's warped morality, Yazidis, unlike Christians, Shias, and others, can be systematically raped. Indeed, this was to be one of the most effective ways to destroy them. What followed was the establishment of a bureaucracy of evil on an industrial scale. ISIS even released a pamphlet entitled Questions and Answers on Taking Captives and Slaves to provide more guidelines. Question: is it permissible to have intercourse with a female slave who has not reached puberty? Answer: it is permissible to have intercourse with the female slave who hasn't reached puberty if she is fit for intercourse. Question: is it permissible to sell a female captive? Answer: it is permissible to buy, sell, or gift female captives and slaves, for they are merely property. When Nadia told me her story in London, it had been almost 2 years since ISIS's genocide against the Yazidis had begun. Thousands of Yazidi women and children were still held captive by ISIS. But no member of ISIS had been prosecuted in a court anywhere in the world for these crimes. Evidence was being lost or destroyed, and prospects for justice looked bleak. Of course, I took the case, and Nadia and I spent more than a year campaigning together for justice. We met repeatedly with the Iraqi government, United Nations representatives, members of the UN Security Council, and ISIS victims. I prepared reports, provided drafts and legal analysis, and gave speeches imploring the UN to act. Most of our interlocutors told us it would be impossible. The Security Council had not taken action on international justice in years. But just as I write this forward, the UN Security Council has adopted a landmark resolution, creating an investigation team that will collect evidence of the crimes committed by ISIS in Iraq. This is a major victory for Nadia and all the victims of ISIS, because it means that evidence will be preserved and that individual ISIS members can be put on trial. I sat next to Nadia in the Security Council when the resolution was adopted unanimously. And as we watched 15 hands go up, Nadia and I looked at each other and smiled. As a human rights lawyer, my job is often to be the voice of those who have been silenced. The journalist behind bars, or the victims of war crimes fighting for their day in court. There is no doubt ISIS tried to silence Nadia when they kidnapped and enslaved her, raped and tortured her, and killed 7 members of her family in a single day. But Nadia refused to be silenced. She has defied all the labels that life has given her: orphan, rape victim, slave, refugee. She has instead created new ones: survivor, Yazidi leader, women's advocate, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, United Nations Goodwill Ambassador, and now author. Over the time I have known her, Nadia has not only found her voice, she has become the voice of every Yazidi who is a victim of genocide, every woman who has been abused, every refugee who has been left behind. Those who thought that by their cruelty they could silence her were wrong. Nadia Murad's spirit is not broken, and her voice will not be muted. Instead, through this book, her voice is louder than ever. Amal Clooney, Barrister, September 2017. Part 1, Chapter 1. Early in the summer of 2014, while I was busy preparing for my last year of high school, 2 farmers disappeared from their fields just outside Kocho, the small Yazidi village in northern Iraq where I was born, and where, until recently, I thought I would live for the rest of my life. One moment, the men were lounging peacefully in the shade of scratchy homemade tarps, and the next they were captive in a small room in a nearby village, home mostly to Sunni Arabs. Along with the farmers, the kidnappers took a hen and a handful of her chicks, which confused us. Maybe they were just hungry, we said to one another, although that did nothing to calm us down. Kocho, for as long as I have been alive, has been a Yazidi village, settled by the nomadic farmers and shepherds who first arrived in the middle of nowhere and decided to build homes to protect their wives from the desert-like heat while they walked their sheep to better grass. They chose land that would be good for farming, but it was a risky location, on the southern edge of Iraq's Sinjar region, where most of the country's Yazidis live, and very close to non-Yazidi Iraq. When the first Yazidi families arrived in the mid-1950s, Kocho was inhabited by Sunni Arab farmers working for landlords in Mosul. But those Yazidi families had hired a lawyer to buy the land. The lawyer, himself a Muslim, is still considered a hero. And by the time I was born, Kocho had grown to about 200 families, all of them Yazidi, and as close as if we were one big family, which we nearly were. The land that made us special also made us vulnerable. Yazidis have been persecuted for centuries.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?